He slid the divorce papers across the white tablecloth like they were nothing, like 5 years of her life were a contract he'd grown tired of renewing. Elias Mercer didn't look up from his phone when he did it. That was the part Serena Vale would remember longest. Not the papers themselves, not the restaurant full of people pretending not to watch, not the way the candlelight caught the gold pen he set beside the documents, with the practiced ease of a man who'd ended things before. It was that he didn't look up. She had dressed carefully that morning without knowing why. Some animal instinct. The gray silk blouse he'd once said made her look like someone's secretary. She'd worn it anyway. "Sign where the tabs are," he said, still looking at his phone. Serena picked up the pen. If you've ever sat across from someone who used to love you and realized they were already gone, not leaving, already gone, then you know exactly what was running through her body in that moment. That particular cold that has nothing to do with temperature. Before we go any further, if this story is hitting different, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because what's coming in the next 4 parts is going to shake you. Now let's go back to that restaurant, because Serena Vale just picked up that pen and the harbor outside is about to change everything. The harborside grill sat at the edge of the marina on the good side of the city, the side where the tablecloths were real linen and the wine list was a separate book. Elias had chosen it deliberately. Serena understood that now, the way she understood looking back that almost everything Elias did was deliberate in the way of a man who confused cruelty with precision. He had made the reservation for 7:30. He had told her only that they needed to talk about the marriage. He had let her spend the afternoon wondering whether this was the conversation where he apologized, or the conversation where he finally said what she'd been watching build behind his eyes for the better part of a year. She had told herself she was prepared for either. She was not prepared for the folder. "I had the attorneys finalize everything last week," he said, still not looking at her. He was reading something on his phone, thumb scrolling with the mild absorption of a man checking sports scores. "The terms are fair. You keep the apartment contents. I'll cover your first 3 months of rent wherever you land." Serena set the pen down. "Elias, the building management already knows. I spoke to them Thursday." "You spoke to the building management before you spoke to me." He looked up then. Not because she'd said something that registered emotionally. She could see that clearly now, the way you can finally see the exact shape of something once you stop hoping it's something else. He looked up because her tone had shifted in a way that required his attention, in the same way a subordinate's unexpected silence required his attention. "I'm being efficient," he said. "It drags out. It gets expensive and ugly. The terms are fair, Serena. You're not going to find an attorney who tells you otherwise." "I wasn't going to find an attorney," she said. "I thought we were going to talk." "We are talking. You handed me legal documents, because this is a legal situation." He set his phone down, face up, notification still pulsing against the white tablecloth. "Look, I know this is hard, but you knew. I think on some level you've known for a long time that this wasn't working. We want different things. We've wanted different things for a while now." Serena looked at him. The careful haircut. The suit that cost more than some people's monthly income, worn with the unconscious ease of a man who no longer noticed what things cost because he had stopped having to. The face she had once found beautiful, which she now recognized as merely symmetrical. "What do I want?" she asked. "What?" "You said we want different things. What do I want, Elias?" He didn't answer immediately. She watched him in the pause, watched the tiny recalibration behind his eyes, the search for the response that would cost him the least. "You want stability," he said finally. "Security. A quieter life. I can't provide that right now. The firm is in a growth phase. I'm not available the way you need me to be." "I never asked you to be available." "Serena, I asked you once to come home before 9 on a Tuesday because it was our anniversary. You sent flowers the next morning and called that a resolution." She kept her voice level. She had a gift for that, for the flat, even delivery of facts that others would have screamed. "I want to know what you think I want, genuinely, because you've been married to me for 5 years and I'm curious what answer you have." Something crossed his face. Irritation, mostly, with something underneath it that might have been embarrassment if Elias had been a different kind of man. This isn't productive, he said. No, Serena agreed. It isn't. She picked up the pen. She signed. She did it quietly, without ceremony, which was not what he'd expected. She could see that, too, in the fractional shift of his posture, the way his shoulders released a tension she hadn't realized he was carrying. He had expected, she understood, some form of performance. Tears, or anger, or pleading. He had prepared for it the way he prepared for depositions, with a ready counter for each possible move. And she had given him nothing to counter, which was a kind of win so small it barely registered. She capped the pen. She set it beside the folder. She looked at him for a long moment without speaking. Okay, she said. Elias blinked. Okay. I hope you get what you're looking for. She meant it. That was the complicated thing, the thing she would sit with for a long time afterward. She actually meant it. Not because she bore him no anger, she did, a deep and settled anger that had nothing to do with the divorce and everything to do with the years that had built to it. But she had made a decision a long time ago, in a different life, in a different city, in a room full of men who measured everything and what it cost someone else, to never let anger make her stupid. She reached for her water glass, and then the harbor exploded. Not with fire, with sound. A percussive, rhythmic thunder that began at the edges of hearing and built fast, too fast, into something that rattled the windows and stilled every conversation in the room simultaneously. Serena knew the sound. She had grown up with the sound. 3 helicopters, she assessed, moving in formation, the acoustics carrying down off the water in a way that told her they were low and they were not passing through. Heads turned. A woman at the bar stood up to see out the window. The maitre d' moved toward the glass with the expression of a man calculating liability. Elias was looking at his phone again. Probably a Coast Guard exercise, he said. Through the window, Serena watched the lights on the water. Familiar lights. A configuration she hadn't seen in 5 years, and had believed, genuinely believed, she would never see again. Elias, she said. I need you to understand something. She kept her eyes on the water. Whatever you think this is, whatever the last 5 years were to you, I was never who you thought I was. And I want to tell you that now because I won't have another opportunity to say it to your face. He looked up. What are you talking about? Outside, the sound had changed. The helicopters had landed somewhere north by the pitch, and what replaced them was the low, seismic thrum of large marine engines cutting back to idle. Through the restaurant window, they could see it now, a vessel moving into the marina. Not a yacht. Calling it a yacht was the way you might call a cathedral a building, technically accurate and entirely wrong. It was black. It was long. It moved through the lit water with the deliberate grace of something that had never needed to hurry because nothing in the water could threaten it. Armed escort craft flanked it on both sides. Serena counted them without appearing to count them. My God, someone at the next table said. The restaurant had stopped pretending to function. Every person in the room was at the windows or craning toward them, drawn by the atavistic pull of encountering something so outside normal scale that the brain demands visual confirmation. The vessel dwarfed the marina. It made the other boats, the expensive boats, the boats that their owners had explained to other people at parties with careful casualness, look like toys left in a bathtub. Elias stood up. He moved toward the window with everyone else, because Elias was constitutionally incapable of not being near the center of anything that commanded a room's attention. Serena stayed seated. She was watching the dock. A gangway extended from the vessel's main deck to the marina with mechanical precision. A man descended it, not hurrying, not performing, simply moving with the efficiency of someone whose time was structured around the time of someone else. He was dressed in a dark suit, no tie, and he was not alone. Men fanned out around him in a pattern that looked casual and was not. The man reached the dock. He was perhaps 45, with gray at his temples, and the kind of posture that comes from decades of knowing exactly where you stand in any room you enter. He walked along the dock past idling charter boats and stunned marina staff, and he did not look left or right. He walked directly to the restaurant entrance. Serena heard the door open behind her. She heard the room's ambient noise change, the subtle contraction of sound that happens when a group of people simultaneously decide to become very still. She did not turn around. She heard footsteps on the hardwood, measured, unhurried. 12 steps from the door to her table, give or take, she calculated, and she was right. The man stopped beside her chair. "Miss Vale," he said. His voice was low and precise, the accent blurred smooth by decades of movement between countries. "I apologize for the spectacle. He wanted to come himself. I told him the spectacle would be unavoidable either way." "Victor," Serena said, "you look well. How long have you been in the harbor?" "We came in on Wednesday. He gave you until tonight." A pause. "He was not always patient. He has learned." Serena looked down at the folder on the table. The signed divorce papers. The pen Elias had provided, which had a subtle engraving on the barrel she had noticed and not commented on. His initials, because Elias Mercer's initials were on everything within his reach. She had known, she thought. Not today specifically, but she had known for months that the arrangement was coming undone, and not only the marriage. Something had been shifting at the edges of the life she'd built here, some membrane of carefully maintained anonymity beginning to wear thin. "He knows I haven't changed my mind," she said. "He knows," Victor said. "He also knows that the situation has changed and that you are no longer in a position to be protected by your absence." Serena was quiet for a moment. "Someone tried to move on the Geneva accounts," she said. It was not a question. 6 weeks ago. We contained it, but it was not the first attempt, and the gap between attempts is narrowing." Victor did not shift his weight or change his expression. He had the quality of a man who had delivered news of all categories in his life and had learned to do it without leaking affect in either direction. "There are things you need to know, Miss Vale. Things Lorenzo has been carrying alone for too long." Elias had pushed back through the crowd. Serena heard him before she saw him, the particular velocity of his approach, the energy of a man who has been excluded from something and interprets that exclusion as an error requiring correction. "Excuse me." His voice, the courtroom voice, calibrated to project authority. "Can I help you? Who are you?" Victor looked at Elias for exactly the amount of time required to complete an assessment and did not answer. "This is my wife," Elias said. "Ex-wife," Serena said, quietly. "As of about 11 minutes ago." Victor turned back to Serena. "The boss is waiting," he said. The word, the specific word, the old word, the word that had followed her out of that world and across an ocean and into a life she had built with considerable effort, landed in her chest with a weight she hadn't been prepared for. Not because it frightened her, because it was familiar. Because underneath the fear she'd carried for years about what that word cost, some part of her had never stopped knowing exactly what it meant. She stood up. She took nothing from the table except her coat, which was draped over the back of her chair. A simple gray wool coat, nothing that would mark her, which was something she had never quite been able to stop doing, traveling light, carrying nothing that identified. "Serena." Elias caught her arm. Not rough, but definitive, that the grip of a man who does not accept exits he hasn't authorized. "What is this? Who is this man? What is going on?" She looked at his hand on her arm. She looked at him. "You wanted to end this marriage," she said. "You ended it. The papers are on the table." A beat. "Let go of my arm, Elias." Something in her tone, the same flat, unperformed certainty that had thrown him earlier, made him release her. She saw it happen, saw the moment his hand's grip softened and fell away, and she recognized the expression on his face because she had seen some version of it before, in other places, on other men who had encountered for the first time the particular quality of calm that lives on the other side of having already survived the worst things. Victor stepped back to allow her ahead of him. Two of the men who'd entered with him positioned themselves at her flanks with a naturalism that spoke to long practice. The restaurant watched. Serena walked to the door. Through the glass, across the dock, the black superyacht sat in its own light, waiting. She could see figures on the upper deck. She could see the glow of the communications array at the helm, equipment that did not belong on a recreational vessel, equipment that told you something about the nature of the organization behind it. She pushed open the door. The night air off the harbor was cold and salt-sharp, and it hit her face in a way that felt like the beginning of something she had spent 5 years telling herself she did not want. Behind her, she heard Elias's voice, aimed at the maitre d' or anyone who would engage with him, cycling through modes, demanding, then confused, then something that might have been the beginning of understanding. "Do you know who that vessel is registered to? Someone needs to. I need to make a call. She didn't hear the rest. She walked down the dock. At the gangway, Victor fell into step beside her. Around them, the escort moved with the choreography of people who had done this before, many times. In many places where the spectacle was unavoidable, and the only response was to move through it as though the spectacle were irrelevant. He's going to want to know everything, Serena said. Yes. The marriage, the years, all of it. Yes. And I'm going to have to tell him about the Geneva problem because I know more about it than he thinks I do. She paused at the base of the gangway. I've been watching the accounts from here. Through intermediaries. I never fully walked away. Victor looked at her. For the first time that evening, something crossed his face that wasn't professional composure. Something that might have been relief, or recognition, or both. He knows that too, Victor said. He was waiting for you to say it. Serena stepped onto the gangway. Above her at the top, someone was waiting. Not Victor's men, not security, not staff. She knew by the silhouette, the height, the particular way he held himself with the weight forward, the posture of a man who has spent his whole life leaning toward whatever comes next. Lorenzo De Luca, her god-brother, the man who had spent 5 years honoring her decision to disappear, and who had come now because honoring that decision had become something he could no longer afford to do. She climbed toward him. The harbor behind her was bright with phone lights, people filming something they didn't have context for, something they would post and discuss and get mostly wrong. Somewhere in that crowd was Elias Mercer, standing in the restaurant doorway or on the dock, watching his ex-wife board a vessel that made everything he'd built look provisional. The divorce papers were still on the white tablecloth inside the restaurant. His pen was still beside them. She didn't need it anymore. At the top of the gangway, Lorenzo reached out and gripped her hand in both of his. Not a handshake, the grip of someone who has been afraid for a long time and is trying not to let that show in a place where showing it would cost something. You took your time, he said. His voice was rough, the way voices get when they've been controlled too long. I had things to finish, Serena said. Are they finished? She looked at him for a moment. Behind him, the deck stretched back into the vessel's interior, lit and operational, full of people who had been waiting for her return, some of them for years. Someone killed my grandfather, she said. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Yes. And you know who? I have a name, he said. I've had it for 8 months. I needed you here before I moved on it. I needed... He stopped. He looked away at the water, then back at her. In the light from the deck, she could see what 5 years had done to him, the lines that hadn't been there, the way he held tension in his neck and shoulders, like a man who had been bracing against something for a very long time. I needed someone I trust to know the truth before I did something I can't take back. Serena held his gaze. Tell me, she said. Lorenzo pulled her inside before she could say another word. Not roughly, but with the grip of a man who had learned that conversations held on open decks, under open sky, with harbor lights and phone cameras pointed from the dock below, were conversations that cost you before they were finished. He moved fast and quiet, one hand on her shoulder, steering her through the main hatch and into the vessel's interior with the practiced economy of someone whose caution was not paranoia but history. The door sealed behind them. The sound dropped. Outside noise, water, wind, the distant hum of the city, reduced to almost nothing. The hull absorbed it. Serena had forgotten this. The particular silence inside a vessel built to this specification, the way it wrapped around you and reminded you that the world you'd just left was genuinely, structurally separated from the one you'd entered. She stopped walking. She was in a corridor paneled in dark wood, lit with recessed lights set low, the kind of lighting that was functional without being aggressive. 2 men stood at intervals down the passage, positioned with the relaxed attentiveness of people who were armed and not pretending otherwise. She recognized the posture. She recognized 2 of the faces. How many on board? She asked. 43 crew, 18 security. Lorenzo released her shoulder. He moved to face her, and in the corridor's light she could finally see him fully. Not the silhouette from the gangway, not the shape of memory. 5 years had thickened him slightly across the shoulders, deepened the lines around his mouth. His hair was still dark, but there was more gray in it than she remembered, concentrated at the temples, spreading. He had the eyes he'd always had, black-brown, very still, the eyes of a man who watched more than he spoke and had decided long ago that this was the better arrangement. Cassian is already aboard. He came in 2 hours ago. Serena went still. You told him we were meeting? I told him you'd agreed to come back. Lorenzo held her gaze steadily. I needed him here. He's been managing Geneva operations since the account breach. He has information you need to hear directly. Lorenzo. She kept her voice even, flat. The voice she used when flatness was the only available container for what was underneath it. You should have told me before the gangway. If I told you before the gangway, you wouldn't have come up. The silence between them had specific weight. This was the thing about Lorenzo De Luca. He was not a man who lied. He rearranged facts, sequenced them strategically, decided what you needed to know in what order. But the things he said were almost always true. It made him, in some ways, more difficult to argue with than people who simply fabricated. Where is he? She asked. The main salon. He's been waiting. And he doesn't know about the name you have. No one knows, Lorenzo said, except you, now. She looked at him for a long moment. The corridor was cool, slightly over-air-conditioned the way these vessels always were. And she was aware of the wool coat still over her arm, which she'd been carrying since the restaurant, and which suddenly felt like something from a different life. Something from the woman who'd sat at that table and signed those papers and told herself she was free. What's his name? She asked. Lorenzo did not answer immediately. He reached into his jacket and removed a small photograph, printed, not digital, which told her something about how seriously he was treating the chain of custody on this information. He held it out. She took it. The photograph was of a man she knew well, a man she'd known since she was 7 years old, the year her grandfather had brought her to meet the people who formed the empire's inner circle. A man who had taught her to read financial documents, who had argued across dinner tables with her grandfather about strategy and discipline and the difference between strength and cruelty, who had sat with her in a hospital waiting room 12 years ago when her mother was in surgery and had not left until the surgeon came out. She handed the photograph back. No, she said. Serena, not Cassian. Her voice did not shake. She was proud of that, in the way you are proud of things you have to work for. Lorenzo, that is not possible. I have known that man my entire life. He loved my grandfather. I know what I found, Lorenzo said. Then show me. That's why you're here. They looked at each other in the corridor, the two of them, the way they had looked at each other across distances and difficulties for 30-plus years, since before either of them fully understood what family meant or what the family they'd been born into would eventually require of them. Serena was 41, Lorenzo was 44. They had grown up in the same rooms, eaten at the same tables, buried the same people. There was between them the particular intimacy of shared grief that had never been fully processed because neither of them had been allowed the time. If you're right, Serena said, about Cassian, I know. Then he's been on this boat for 2 hours. With you. Yes. Knowing that you brought me back. Yes. And he doesn't know that you know. Lorenzo said nothing, which was his answer. Serena closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When she opened them, something in her face had rearranged itself. The way faces rearrange when a person accepts a situation they cannot change and begins allocating their energy toward what they can. Then we need to be very careful in that room, she said. I know that. Because if he suspects, I know, Serena. Don't look at him the way you're looking at me right now, she said. You have grief all over your face. You need to put it somewhere else. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. He looked away, down the corridor, and she watched him do the things she'd watched him do their whole lives. The deliberate internal reorganization, the shuttering of whatever he was actually feeling into a part of himself he could seal off during business. He was good at it. He had always been good at it. She had never decided whether to admire that or grieve it. Ready? He said. No, she said. Let's go. The main salon was large enough to feel like a room in a building rather than a space on a vessel, which was its purpose. Long windows on either side, currently shuttered. A table of pale wood running the center length, surrounded by chairs that someone had arranged with intention. Not the casual scatter of a social space, but the specific geometry of a meeting. Documents on the table. Tablets. A physical map, paper, weighted flat at the corners. Cassian Moretti stood when she entered. He was 68 years old, lean in the way of men who had been lean all their lives, with white hair cut close, and a face that had always looked to Serena like the face of a man who spent a lot of time thinking and not enough time sleeping. He wore a dark suit, no tie, a white shirt with the collar open, his standard working dress, she recognized, the same in every country, every context. He had the same quality he'd always had, the quality that had made him indispensable to her grandfather, the ability to project absolute calm in any situation, a calm so complete it was almost visible, like a physical material he wrapped around himself. "Serena," he said, and the warmth in his voice was so natural, so familiar, so exactly the voice she had heard her entire life, that she felt something shift dangerously behind her sternum. She made herself cross the room. She took the hand he extended. She let him hold it between both of his. "You look like your mother," he said. "She had the same thing you have. The way she walked into a room like she already knew what was in it." "I've been told that before," Serena said. She sat down. Lorenzo sat across from her, which put Cassian at the head of the table between them, in the way a triangle always has a point facing toward you. "I want to go through the Geneva material," she said, "from the beginning." Cassian settled into his chair. He pulled a tablet toward him, unlocked it. 6 weeks ago, 3 of the secondary holding accounts were probed. Not accessed, probed. Testing the authentication architecture. It was subtle enough that the automated systems almost didn't flag it, but one of our people in Zurich caught a timing anomaly in the access logs. He turned the tablet to show her. The probe originated from a server cluster in Bratislava. We traced the cluster to a shell company registered in Cyprus. The beneficial ownership leads through 3 layers to a firm in Dubai that we know has historically worked for the Varro Syndicate, Serena said. Cassian stopped. He looked at her. "You know the Varro connection?" he said. "I've been watching the accounts," she said. "From here, through proxies." The expression on Cassian's face moved through something. Surprise, she thought, and then something underneath the surprise that she might have called calculation, except that she was watching for it and still almost missed it, because Cassian Moretti had 68 years of practice making calculation look like engagement. "You should have told me," he said. "I'm telling you now. If you'd flagged this 6 weeks ago—" "I flagged it to myself," she said. "I wasn't ready to come back. I'm back now, so let's move forward." Cassian held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, the slow nod of a man processing information and choosing not to push on a point he could return to later. He turned the tablet back toward himself. "The Varro connection is concerning because they shouldn't have the resources for this level of technical operation. They're a second-tier organization at best. They've been second-tier for 20 years, which means either they've had a significant influx of capital and expertise, or someone is handling this operation for them and using their infrastructure as cover. Someone with enough knowledge of our security architecture to know where to probe," Serena said. "Yes. Someone who knew which accounts to target." "The accounts in question," Cassian said, "are not common knowledge. The holding structure was designed by your grandfather with a small circle of—" He stopped. "With a small circle," Serena said. The room was quiet for a moment. Lorenzo had not spoken since they sat down. He was looking at the map on the table, or appearing to look at it, which was not the same thing. "How did your grandfather die?" Serena asked. Cassian looked at her. "Cardiac arrest, you know this. I was 67 years old. He had the cardiovascular health of a man 20 years younger. He hadn't smoked since his 40s, and he had a cardiac event in his sleep with no prior indicators." She kept her voice level, factual, the same voice she used when she was deconstructing a financial document and wanted the numbers to speak without interference from tone. "Did you ever have the toxicology independently reviewed?" The silence that followed was long enough to have a specific texture. "The official examination was thorough," Cassian said. "That wasn't what I asked." "Serena." His voice was careful now. Still warm. That was the extraordinary thing. Even now the warmth was there, because it was not performed warmth. It was real warmth. And that was the most disorienting part of everything she was sitting with. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," she said. "I'm asking whether the toxicology was independently reviewed. Yes or no?" "No," he said. "It wasn't. I want it reviewed." "The body was interred." "I know where he's interred. I want an order to exhume." She looked at Lorenzo now. Can we do that without going through official channels? We can, Lorenzo said. His voice was flat, the flatness that meant he was holding something tightly. I can have a team arranged in 48 hours. Cassian looked between them. Something shifted in his face. Not guilt. She couldn't call it guilt. She was too close to the situation to trust her own reads. But something recalibrated. A reassessment of the room he was in. You came back for this, he said to Serena, not the Geneva situation. I came back for everything, she said. Outside the shuttered windows, she could hear the harbor sounds muffled through the hull. Water, wind, somewhere distant, a boat engine, the real world, going on without them. There's something else, Lorenzo said. Both Serena and Cassian looked at him. He reached into the inside breast pocket of his jacket and removed a small drive. He set it on the table. 3 weeks ago, he said, one of our people in New York reported an approach. A law firm, not ours, not a firm we work with, began a quiet process of acquiring minority positions in 4 companies we hold majority stakes in. Not hostile, not visible, the kind of accumulation that flies under regulatory radar when it's done slowly enough. He paused. The law firm is Mercer Ashford Bryce. Serena went very still. Cassian looked at her. Mercer, he said. As in my ex-husband's firm, Serena said. Her voice was careful and empty, the voice of someone extracting emotion from a sentence before it can damage them. Yes. Coincidence? Cassian asked. I don't deal in coincidences, Serena said. How long has the acquisition been in process? The first position was taken 11 months ago, Lorenzo said, before the Geneva probe, before you called me to say you thought the marriage was ending. She heard the implication. She let it land. 11 months ago, she had not said a word to Lorenzo about the marriage. Not yet. The erosion had been ongoing, but she had not yet named it, not even to herself with any specificity. Someone knew the marriage was ending before I did, she said. Or someone was accelerating it, Lorenzo said, feeding Elias information, giving him confidence, making the conditions right. For what purpose? Cassian said. To flush her out, Serena said. The words settled into the room. She looked at the drive on the table, the map, the tablets with their neat columns of account data. She looked at Cassian, who was watching her with an expression that was attentive and concerned and had been watching her this way for 30 years. And she made herself think about what Lorenzo had told her in the corridor, what the photograph had shown, and she made herself hold both of those things at the same time. The man she had known and trusted, and the possibility that she had not known him at all. The Vero Syndicate wouldn't have the intelligence resources to run a parallel operation in New York and Geneva simultaneously, she said. They wouldn't know our holding structure. They wouldn't know my marriage was failing. They wouldn't know how to time all of this. No, Lorenzo said, they wouldn't. But someone who had been inside this organization for decades, she said, who had access to the full picture, who knew every account, every holding, every piece of intelligence our people had gathered over 30 years. She paused. That person could orchestrate it and use the Vero infrastructure as a cutout. Cassian picked up his water glass and drank from it. His hand, Serena noticed, was entirely steady. She hated herself slightly for noticing that and for the direction her noticing was going. Then we need to identify who that person is, Cassian said, and move quickly. If they intended your return as a trigger, they'll move now that I'm here, Serena said. Yes. Do you have a suspicion? Cassian asked. His voice was careful, interested, professionally engaged with the problem in the manner of a man who had spent his entire life being professionally engaged with problems. Someone inside the organization with this level of access and this length of perspective? She looked at him. She looked at him the way you look at something you've looked at your whole life and are seeing differently for the first time, which is one of the more violent experiences available to a human being, this particular form of re-seeing. Not yet, she said. But I will. Lorenzo's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it and his face did something she almost didn't catch. A flicker, quickly suppressed. Excuse me, he said. He stood. He moved toward the corridor door, phone in hand. That left Serena and Cassian. The room felt different with Lorenzo gone. The triangle of the seating arrangement resolved into a line, 2 people facing each other across a pale wood table, a map between them. I owe you an apology, Cassian said. She waited, When you left, he said, I was angry with you. I didn't show it, but I was angry. Your grandfather had just died, the organization was in a difficult transition, and you chose to disappear. He turned the water glass in his hands. I thought it was weakness. I've thought that for 5 years. I'm revising that assessment. Why? She asked. Because the woman who walked into this room, he said, is not a woman who ran away. She's a woman who went somewhere she could see clearly. He paused. Whatever you've been doing from a distance, it's kept you thinking, and you came back with a perspective none of us have, because none of us left. It was so precisely what she would have wanted to hear, so exactly calibrated to the particular shape of her uncertainty, the guilt she carried about leaving, the narrative she'd needed and never gotten. She registered this. She registered it the way you register the sound of a mechanism in a room you've just decided might have a trap in it. Thank you, she said, and smiled, and the smile was real enough that she was not particularly proud of herself for it. Lorenzo returned. His face was composed, and she could see the effort it was costing him, which meant whatever the call had been was something he was controlling. We have a problem, he said. What kind? He looked at Cassian. He looked at Serena. He made a decision she could see him making. There are 2 men outside the marina, he said. They've been there for the last hour. Our street team flagged them 20 minutes ago. They're not press, and they're not police. He set his phone face up on the table. The surveillance image was grainy but sufficient. 2 men in a parked vehicle on the street above the marina, positioned with a sightline to the gangway. They work for a private contractor. The contractor has been associated in the past with operations targeting. He stopped. Targeting who? Who? Cassian said. Targeting me, Serena said. Lorenzo nodded once. She looked at the image on the phone. Then she looked at the drive he had set on the table earlier, the drive with the information about Elias's firm and the acquisition positions. They weren't watching for me to arrive, she said. They already knew I was here. They were watching to confirm. Yes, Lorenzo said, which means the people who sent them were notified when you signed the divorce papers, Lorenzo said, or before. Someone had been waiting for her to complete that process. Someone had needed her to be, legally and formally, a woman with no attachment to the life she'd built here. Someone had needed her untethered before they moved. She thought about Elias in the restaurant, the timing of the papers, the reservation made in advance, the management of the building already notified, everything handled with the efficient precision that Elias always mistook for intelligence, but was actually just the precision of a man who had been given instructions by someone smarter than him and executed them faithfully. Elias, she said. The word came out flat. How long has someone been managing him? Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Based on the acquisition timeline, at minimum 11 months. Based on when we think the approach began. The false financial intelligence, the investment introductions, the off-books meetings, possibly closer to 2 years. 2 years. She had been married to a man for the last 2 years of their marriage, while someone used him as an instrument against her family. He might not have known exactly what he was doing. He almost certainly hadn't. Elias Mercer was many things, but she did not believe he would have knowingly operated against a criminal organization. I was too intelligent for that level of stupid. He was also, she now understood, the kind of man whose ambition could be steered without his knowing it, by the right person with the right resources and the right patience. He's a liability now, she said, to whoever was running him. Yes, Lorenzo said. When they confirm I'm here and I'm engaged with the organization, he becomes a loose end, Lorenzo finished. We need to get him somewhere safe, Serena said. It surprised her, the speed at which she said it, the absence of deliberation. She looked at Lorenzo and saw that he had expected it, had been waiting for it, and she felt a brief irritation at being predictable that she set aside because there were more important things. Not because I owe him anything, because they'll kill him, and he doesn't know why. He's not going to want your protection, Cassian said. That's not relevant, Serena said. Where is he now? Lorenzo checked his phone. Our street team has eyes on him. He's still at the marina. He hasn't left. A pause. He's been sitting on the dock for the last 40 minutes. She thought about Elias sitting on a dock in the dark. She thought about the version of him she'd first known, not the man he'd become, but the man who'd been visible under that man, briefly, early on, when ambition hadn't yet crowded out everything else. She had loved that version. She had tried, for longer than was wise, to wait for it to resurface. It hadn't. That was no longer her problem. But he was still a person, and someone wanted him dead, and that was her problem, whether she wanted it to be or not. "Bring him aboard," she said. Lorenzo stared at her. "Serena, he's safer here than on that dock. Tell the street team to bringing a civilian on board while we have surveillance outside the marina." "Then move the boat first," she said. "Take us out of the harbor. Lose the surveillance. Bring him aboard when we're clear." She looked at Lorenzo with a steadiness she was working to maintain, because under the steadiness, she was extraordinarily tired, the specific exhaustion of a person who has spent years trying to live quietly and has been reminded tonight, very thoroughly, that quiet was never something they were actually allowed. "I am not making a sentimental decision. I am making a strategic one. Elias knows things about the acquisition, about the approach, about whoever has been feeding him intelligence for 2 years, that we need. He is also a point of leverage. They will use him if we don't control where he is." The room was quiet. "She's right," Cassian said. Lorenzo looked at him. Something in Lorenzo's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'll give the order," Lorenzo said. His voice was even. "We'll move in 20 minutes. He left the room again. Serena sat with Cassian in the salon, the pale wood table between them, the map, the drive, the weight of everything she'd walked back into. She was aware of her heartbeat in a way she wasn't usually aware of it. Not fast, but deliberate, each beat a small separate event. Cassian refilled her water glass from the carafe on the table. He did it the way he had always done small attentive things, without drawing attention to it, without making it a gesture, just quietly making the practical situation slightly better. She thought about who he was, the 68 years of him, the man who had argued her grandfather down from decisions that would have destroyed the organization twice. The man who had once told her, when she was 17 and furious about something she couldn't now remember, that power wasn't what you did when you were certain. It was what you did when you weren't. She thought about the photograph Lorenzo had showed her in the corridor. She thought about the steadiness of Cassian's hand on his water glass. And she thought, I need to be wrong about this. I need Lorenzo to be wrong. Because if Cassian Moretti orchestrated her grandfather's death and has been sitting at this table for the last hour, with his carefully calibrated warmth and his precise, useful reassurances, then the organization has a wound at its core that has been bleeding for years. And she thought, I need to find out the truth before he figures out how much she knows. The engines began to shift beneath her feet, the deep vibration of the vessel's propulsion coming to life, power transferring through the hull in a way you felt in your bones more than heard. The boat was moving. Somewhere on the dock they were leaving behind, a man in a parked car was watching them go and reaching for a phone. Somewhere on another dock, Elias Mercer was sitting in the dark, not yet knowing that the people who had used him for 2 years had already decided he was no longer useful. And somewhere in this vessel, in the communications room or the security station or one of the private cabins, someone was already making arrangements that Serena Vale had not authorized and would not have approved. She could feel it, not see it, not name it yet, but feel it the way you feel weather changing before the first visible sign, the drop in pressure, the particular quality of stillness that comes before something breaks. She picked up the drive from the table. She turned it in her fingers. Tell me everything you know about the Vero Syndicate's current leadership, she said to Cassian. Who runs them now? Who replaced Dominic Vero after he died? Cassian folded his hands on the table. A man named Petrov, he said, Ukrainian. Came up through contract security work, European operations. He paused. He's not particularly sophisticated. As I said, Vero is second tier. The interesting question is who's directing him. Yes, Serena said. It is. She watched his face. His face gave her nothing. Beneath the vessel, the harbor floor fell away as they moved into open water, and the lights of the marina receded through the shuttered windows into something small and distant, and the night opened up around them in all directions. There was no going back to the restaurant, no going back to the signed papers on the white tablecloth, the signed away life, the 5 years of careful invisibility. The organization had its heiress, and somewhere aboard, the person who had spent years trying to ensure that never happened was now trapped on the same vessel as her, with open water in every direction and no exit that didn't require her permission. The drive contained 47 files. Serena knew this because she'd spent the first hour at sea in the vessel's communications room, door locked, working through the directory while the lights of the coast diminished behind them and the open water settled into the long, slow roll of deep channel. She hadn't slept. She hadn't eaten the food someone had left outside the door on a tray. She had worked through the files the way she'd been trained to work through financial documents, not looking for what she expected to find, but reading what was actually there and letting that tell her what to expect. The 47th file stopped her cold. It was a communication log. Encrypted, but decrypted already. Lorenzo had the key, had cracked it weeks ago, which meant he'd had this for weeks and had chosen to give it to her tonight, on the boat, with Cassian aboard, in this specific sequence. She was going to have a conversation with him about that sequence and his reasons for it, but that was later. First, she needed to get through what she was reading. The log was 18 months of communication between a sender using a rotating series of anonymous relay addresses and a recipient identified only as P. Petrov. She was certain within 4 exchanges. By the 8th exchange, she was certain enough that her hands went very still on the keyboard and stayed that way for almost a minute while she finished reading. The sender knew the Vale family's account architecture in granular detail, knew the holding structure, the beneficial ownership layers, the authentication protocols. Not in outline, but in specifics, the kind of specifics that took years of access to accumulate. The sender knew about the Geneva accounts specifically, their purpose and their balance ranges, information that had never appeared in any document that left the organization's inner circle. The sender also knew about Elias Mercer. Not as a husband to be weaponized, the sender had known about Elias before Serena married him. There was a reference, early in the log, 18 months before the divorce, to a profile. An assessment. A man whose ambition exceeded his intelligence in exactly the right ratio, whose financial pressure points were documented, whose professional vanity could be leveraged through the right introductions to the right people. Someone had found Elias before she'd met him. She sat with that for a long moment. The nausea of it was specific and cold, not the hot nausea of shock, but the cold variety that comes from understanding something that has been true for a long time without your knowledge. The marriage. The 5 years. The careful erosion of her certainty, her quietness. The particular way Elias had always made her feel slightly insufficient without being able to name exactly how. All of it, she now understood, had been constructed. Not by him. He had simply been the instrument. But the design had preceded her. Someone had built a 5-year trap, and she had lived inside it. She ejected the drive. She put it in her interior jacket pocket. She unlocked the communications room door and walked back through the corridor toward the main salon. And she did not permit herself the luxury of falling apart in the corridor, because there was no version of this situation in which falling apart in the corridor helped anything. Lorenzo was in the salon alone. Cassian had been moved, given a cabin, ostensibly for rest, the door monitored by 2 men who were there ostensibly for his security. The fiction was holding, barely. She set the drive on the table in front of Lorenzo. "How long have you known about the approach to Elias?" she said. Lorenzo looked at her face. He read whatever was on it. What? 6 weeks, he said. "That's when you found the log." "Yes." "You knew for 6 weeks that someone built the marriage." He didn't answer immediately, and she understood that he was choosing his words with the care of a man walking on ice, and she also understood that his care right now was not something she had the patience for. "Yes," he said, "and you didn't tell me." "I needed you here first. If I told you remotely, I would have come faster," she said. "Lorenzo, I would have come the same day." He looked at her steadily. "Maybe," he said, "but I couldn't risk the approach being intercepted. If whoever is running this operation learned that we'd found the log and were moving to bring you in, they would have accelerated the timeline before we were ready. And now we're ready?" "No," he said, "but we're further along than we were." She sat down. She was aware of her own breathing, not ragged, but deliberate, the kind of breathing that requires attention. The sender in the log. "You have a working theory." "I have more than a theory." "Then say it." He reached into this file folder on the table and produced a single printed page, not the photograph from the corridor, something different, a financial document with a summary header she recognized as the format used by one of their Zurich auditors. He pushed it across to her. She read it. The document traced a series of outgoing transfers from a dormant operational account, one of the accounts used historically for field operations in Western Europe. An account that Serena had known about, but that had not appeared in any communication with the outside world in over a decade. The transfers were small enough individually to avoid automatic flags. Over 14 months, they totaled $11 million, moved through 4 jurisdictions, and deposited ultimately into a holding vehicle in Luxembourg. The Luxembourg vehicle's beneficial owner was listed as a trust. The trust's registered agent was a law firm. The law firm was in Milan. Serena knew the firm. She had been taken there at 14 years old by her grandfather to witness a contract signing. She remembered the building's lobby, black marble, a fountain in the center that seemed too large for the space, a receptionist who looked at a 14-year-old girl with the polite blankness of someone trained to treat every visitor with equal discretion. She remembered the lawyer her grandfather had met with that day. Old man even then, 70s, with an extraordinary quality of stillness. The firm had a senior partner now who was the old man's son. She had met him at her grandfather's funeral. He had stood next to Cassian Moretti at the graveside. She looked up from the document. Lorenzo was watching her. "When did you pull this?" she asked. 3 weeks ago. The Zurich auditor found the anomaly in a routine review. They flagged it to me directly, not through the standard reporting chain. He paused. I asked them to keep it within a 2-person circle. The auditor and her direct superior, no one else. Not Cassian. Not Cassian. She looked at the document again. $11 million was not the number that mattered. The organization moved amounts that made $11 million look administrative. What mattered was the account it came from, the dormant operational account, because the people with access to that account were not a long list. That list had never been long. Her grandfather had been particular about it, had reduced it deliberately over the years as he came to trust fewer and fewer people with the operational layer of the business. Who had access, she said. The current list. 4 people, Lorenzo said. Myself. You. Theoretically, your access was never formally revoked when you left, which was an oversight we should discuss. The account administrator in Zurich, who is the auditor's superior, and who has been with us for 19 years with a completely clean record. He stopped. And the 4th, Serena said. Cassian, Lorenzo said. She put the document face down on the table. She pressed her palms flat on the surface. Outside, the sea was dark, and the vessel moved through it with its steady diesel patience. And inside the salon, the air conditioning made its low white noise. And Serena Vale sat with the understanding that the man who had taught her to read financial documents had spent 14 months systematically draining an account to fund the operation that had killed her grandfather, destroyed her marriage, and driven her into 5 years of voluntary exile. He'll know by morning, she said, that I've read the files. Possibly sooner. He's careful. How many people on this vessel are his? The question landed in the room and sat there. Lorenzo's jaw tightened fractionally. I've been trying to determine that, he said. I believe 3 of the security team have been financially compromised. I can't confirm a 4th. The crew is clean. The crew doesn't have enough organizational access to be useful to him, so there was no incentive to approach them. 3 compromised security personnel on a vessel with 18 security. Yes. Do you know which 3? 2 with certainty. 1 I suspect but haven't confirmed. She looked at him. And Cassian doesn't know that you know any of this. He's been behaving as though he doesn't, but Cassian is very good at behaving. She thought about the salon, an hour ago, Cassian refilling her water glass, the steadiness of his hand, the precisely calibrated warmth in his voice, 68 years old and not one visible crack. Is it possible, she said carefully, that someone else is using Cassian's access without his knowledge? That his credentials were… No, Lorenzo said. The word was flat and final. The log contains references that only Cassian could have written. Contextual knowledge about your grandfather that no one else alive possesses. Details about the internal disputes of the last 5 years that existed only in verbal conversations between Cassian and myself. His voice didn't change. It was the voice of a man delivering a verdict he'd spent months reaching and no longer had any energy to dispute. He killed your grandfather, Serena, and he spent 5 years waiting for you to either stay gone or come back on his terms. When you came back on yours tonight, with the organization intact behind you. He stopped. He became the problem, she said. He's been the problem for 5 years. Tonight is when it becomes something we have to resolve. She stood up. She walked to the window, still shuddered, the metal louvers closed against the darkness. And then she turned back because looking at a closed window wasn't useful. "Elias," she said, "where is he?" "The street team picked him up from the dock 40 minutes ago. He's in a vehicle, headed to a secondary location we keep outside the city. He doesn't know why he's being moved. He's been—" a pause. "Resistant. I need to talk to him." "Serena, he knows things he doesn't know he knows. 2 years of contact with whoever was running him. Introductions, meetings, financial arrangements, people whose faces he's seen. He's a witness who doesn't know what he witnessed." She looked at Lorenzo with the directness that had always been her most effective instrument, the refusal to look elsewhere when the answer was in front of her. "I need 2 hours with him. He's not going to cooperate with you specifically. That's my problem. He's also currently under the impression that you arranged to have him followed from a restaurant by a criminal organization, which from his perspective tonight is not an inaccurate characterization of events." "Then I'll explain the accurate characterization," she said. "Where is Cassian now?" "Cabin 7, 2 men outside the door." "Both of them yours?" A beat. "Yes." "Keep him there. Don't tell him about the drive. Don't tell him about the auditor's report. I need—" She stopped. She was running calculations, the way she had been trained to run them, sequencing what needed to happen in what order before the situation consumed the available time. "I need 12 hours, maybe less. I need the communication lines to the Zurich auditor kept completely dark. No outgoing, no incoming. I need the 3 compromised security personnel separated from any access to the vessel's communication systems. I can do that without raising flags if I do it gradually. Do it gradually. And I need someone to pull everything we have on Petrov's current operation in Europe. Physical locations, assets, personnel. If Cassian has been directing the Varo syndicate, there will be a point of contact. A handler below Cassian, someone who actually interfaced with Petrov's people. That person is our path to evidence that will hold." Lorenzo picked up the drive from the table. He turned it in his fingers. He looked at her with an expression that was tired and precise and stripped of everything except the essential. The look of a man who had been carrying something for a very long time and was finally able to set part of it down. "What do you need from me?" he said. "I need you to keep running this vessel exactly as though nothing has changed," she said. "And I need you to trust me. I've always trusted you." "You held back the log for 6 weeks," she said. He didn't flinch. "I had to be certain you'd come back in a state to use it, not in a state to react." He held her gaze. "I was protecting you." "I know," she said. "You can stop now." She left the salon. The corridor outside was dim, the ship's night lighting, amber and low. She moved toward the forward section where the guest cabins ran, passing the 2 men stationed outside cabin 7 without looking at them, walking past with the settled pace of someone who belongs in every space she occupies, a quality her grandfather had noted when she was young and had spent considerable effort cultivating, the carriage of authority that precedes formal authority by years. She kept walking until she reached the vessel's forward lounge, a smaller room than the main salon, used for private meetings, and equipped with a satellite communications terminal on a secured console in the corner. She sat down at the terminal. She did not log in under her own credentials. Her access to the system was theoretically still live, but she was not going to touch a system Cassian might have seeded until she understood what he'd had time to do in the 2 hours before her arrival. She pulled out her personal phone. The burner, not the regular one. A number connected to an identity that did not intersect with Serena Vale or her married name. A number she'd maintained for 5 years with the stubborn practicality of a woman who understood that you never entirely surrender your exits. She dialed. 3 rings. 4. "It's late," said a woman's voice, dry, unhurried, with an accent that had been rubbed smooth by decades in international finance. "I'm back," Serena said. Silence for a moment. Then, "How long?" "I don't know yet. I need a favor." "You always need a favor when you call at this hour." "I need a Luxembourg registration pulled. A trust vehicle. I have the registered agent." She gave the Milan firm's name. "I need beneficial ownership confirmed independently of whatever our Zurich office has on record. And I need it done through channels that have no connection to the family name." "That's not a small ask." "I know." 24 hours? 12 if you can manage it." A long pause. "I'll see what I can do. Are you safe?" Serena considered the question in its genuine form, not rhetorically, but actually. Was she safe? On a vessel in open water with a man she now believed had killed her grandfather, with 3 compromised security personnel, with the organization she'd spent 5 years avoiding now structured entirely around her return, with an ex-husband somewhere on the mainland who didn't know yet that he'd been used as a chess piece by someone who had decided long ago that Serena Vale's weakness was the ordinary life she'd tried to build? Not particularly, she said. Call me when you have something. She ended the call. She sat for a moment in the forward lounge, in the amber light, listening to the vessel move through the water. Beneath her feet, through the hull, she could feel the engine's pulse, steady, mechanical, indifferent to everything happening above it. She thought about her grandfather. Not the abstract concept of him, not the organizational role he'd occupied, but the specific physical man. The smell of the tobacco he gave up, but still kept in his desk drawer because he liked the smell. The way he laughed at his own jokes first, before the punchline, unable to contain it. The argument they'd had the last time she'd seen him alive. She had told him she was leaving, that she was done, that she could not continue in this life, and he had looked at her for a long moment without speaking, and then said, very quietly, that he understood, and that he would miss her, and that she should go before she couldn't anymore. Had he known then? Had he known, or suspected, that someone inside the circle was working against him, and had he sent her away not out of acceptance, but out of protection? She was never going to be able to ask him. The thought arrived without softness, and she let it arrive that way, without the cushioning she might once have reached for. The door to the forward lounge opened. She turned. It was not who she expected. It was not one of Lorenzo's men, not Cassian, not Victor. It was one of the security personnel she had identified on her mental list. A man named Drazen, broad-shouldered, with a face that had been rearranged by violence at some point in his past, one ear slightly lower than the other. He had been with the organization for 3 years. He had come from a previous position with a security contractor in Eastern Europe. He was one of the 2 that Lorenzo had identified with certainty. He had a phone in his hand. "Miss Vale," he said. His voice was careful. "I'm sorry to disturb you." "What do you need, Drazen?" He looked at the phone in his hand. He looked at her. She watched his face with the absolute attention she reserved for moments where the content of a face mattered more than the content of words. "There's been a development," he said. "Mr. DeLuca asked me to inform you personally." "Then why didn't Mr. DeLuca call me himself?" Drazen's eyes moved, fractionally, briefly, to the communication terminal in the corner, then back to her face. "The communication systems have been briefly restricted," he said, "a security precaution." She went very still inside. Outside, she kept her body exactly as it was, hands in her lap, spine straight, face arranged in the expression of mild attention she'd been wearing. The communication systems had been restricted. Lorenzo had told her he was going to do exactly that, gradually, without raising flags, separating the compromised personnel from system access. But Lorenzo had not told her he was going to do it in the next 40 minutes, which meant one of 2 things. Either Lorenzo had moved faster than he'd indicated, or Drazen was here because someone had told Drazen that the communication systems were about to be restricted, and Drazen had gotten to her first, ahead of whatever message Lorenzo was actually trying to send, to offer her a story that explained the silence before she could query it. "What's the development?" she said. "A boat has been following us," Drazen said, "since we left the harbor. Our radar picked it up 20 minutes ago. Fast-moving, running dark. Mr. DeLuca has asked everyone to remain in their current locations while we assess." "A boat following us," she repeated. "Yes, Miss Vale. And Mr. DeLuca wants me to stay in this room. As a precaution." She looked at him. He met her eyes with the practiced composure of a man who had rehearsed this conversation, who had decided on the correct expression and was wearing it with confidence. She stood up. "Thank you, Drazen," she said. "I'll go find Mr. DeLuca myself." He shifted his weight, just slightly, 1 foot repositioning, the body's unconscious response to a situation deviating from the plan. He did specifically ask. "I heard you," she said. "You can escort me if you'd like." He was not going to physically stop her. They both knew that. Whatever had been decided, stopping her physically in a corridor of a vessel full of Lorenzo's people was not in any plan Drazen would have been given. His function here was delay and misdirection, not force. She walked past him and into the corridor. She moved fast once she was past him. Not running, but the kind of walk that covers ground. Back toward the main salon, past it, toward the security station amidships, where the communications console and the vessel's monitoring systems were centralized. She could hear Drazen behind her, keeping pace. She reached the security station and pushed the door open. Lorenzo was inside. He was at the monitoring console with Victor, both of them looking at a radar screen. He turned when she entered and she read his face instantly. Not alarm exactly, but the heightened attention of a situation that was developing faster than anticipated. "Drazen told you about the boat?" he said. "Drazen told me a story," she said. "Is there a boat?" "Yes." Lorenzo pointed at the radar display. A contact on the screen positioned at the edge of the display's range, moving at speed on a parallel course. "It's been maintaining distance for the last 18 minutes. It's not Coast Guard. Wrong speed profile, wrong pattern. It's a fast interceptor. Private." "Who sent it?" "We're working on that." She looked at the display, at the contact on the screen, at the distance between the contact and the blinking center point of the display that represented the vessel they were standing in. "Elias," she said. "Where is he right now?" "Still in the vehicle. They're 30 minutes out from the secondary location." "Turn them around," she said. "Bring him here." "There's a boat following us. There's a boat following us because someone signaled from this vessel that we'd left the harbor. Bringing Elias here doesn't change the threat. But if whoever sent that boat gets to him before we do." She stopped. She looked at the radar screen. At the parallel contact, maintaining its distance, its steady course. "They're not going to intercept us. They can't board a vessel with our security profile without a major operation, and they didn't have time to assemble one. They're tracking. They're confirming our position and our heading. When they have what they need, they'll break off and relay the information." "To who?" "To whoever is waiting for Elias to become accessible," she said. "The vehicle he's in. Does whoever sent this boat know about the secondary location?" Lorenzo looked at Victor. Victor's face was very controlled. "It's possible," he said carefully. "If the compromised personnel had access to operational planning. If they had access to the vehicle routing," Serena said, "then the secondary location is already known." She turned back to Lorenzo. "Call the vehicle. Tell them to change course. Don't give them a new destination yet. Just get them off the pre-planned route." She pulled out the burner phone. "I need to reach Elias directly. Give me the vehicle's number." Lorenzo gave it to her. She dialed. 4 rings. 5. A man's voice. Not Elias, the driver, short and cautious. "Yes." "Change your route," she said. "Right now. Take the next available turn and call me back from a different line in 10 minutes. A pause. "Who is this?" "Tell Elias it's his ex-wife," she said. "He'll cooperate." She hung up. She looked at the radar screen again. The contact was still there, steady on its parallel course, keeping distance, keeping pace. Patient. Well-funded, to afford a fast boat and the personnel and the patience to run a maritime surveillance operation on a vessel this size. "The boat appeared 18 minutes after we left the harbor," she said. "Drazen was in the corridor outside the forward lounge approximately 25 minutes after we left the harbor." Lorenzo looked at her. "He was reporting my location to someone," she said, confirming I was isolated from the main group before the communication restriction. They wanted a window. She thought about what would have happened if she'd stayed in the forward lounge, if she'd let Drazen keep her there with his story about security precautions and boats in the dark, while someone, Cashin, or someone acting on Cashin's orders, did something aboard this vessel in that window. "I need you to check on cabin 7, she said. "Right now." Lorenzo moved. He was out of the security station fast, Victor behind him, and Serena was right behind both of them, back through the corridor at a controlled run, back toward the guest cabins, toward the amber light and the 2 men who should have been outside cabin 7's door. The corridor was empty. Lorenzo stopped. Serena looked at the door to cabin 7. It was standing slightly open, not thrown open, not visibly damaged, just ajar by 2 or 3 inches, the kind of gap that means something was interrupted rather than completed. Lorenzo pushed it open. The cabin was empty. The bed undisturbed. The small desk empty. The narrow window, this far down in the vessel, a porthole rather than a window, was dogged shut, locked from the inside. On the floor near the porthole, a single shoe. Not Cassian's shoe. One of the security team's shoes, a heavy black boot, the standard issue worn by all of Lorenzo's men. She looked at it. She thought about Cassian's hands, steady on his water glass. 68 years old, lean, with the knowledge of 68 years of organizational violence and none of the sentimentality that made people slow. She thought about 3 compromised security personnel, 2 confirmed, 1 suspected. She thought about the empty corridor where 2 men should have been standing. He knew, she said. Her voice was quiet, not shaking. Be a territory on the other side of it, where emotion burns clean and leaves only clarity. He knew you knew. He's been 1 step ahead of us since the salon. Lorenzo stood in the doorway of the empty cabin, and his face was doing something she had never seen it do in 44 years of knowing him. It was doing nothing, which was the face of a man experiencing a failure so complete that his features could not locate the appropriate expression for it. He's on this vessel, she said. He can't go anywhere. We find him, and we... Her burner phone rang. She answered it. It's me. Elias. His voice was tight, clipped, stripped of everything except whatever was running through him at this particular moment. The driver changed course like you said. I don't know where we are. Some industrial area. The driver won't tell me. You want to tell me what the hell is happening? Listen to me very carefully, she said. There is a man who has been feeding you information for approximately 2 years. Introductions, investment opportunities, intelligence about your firm's competition. I need you to tell me his name. Silence. Elias. His name. I don't know what You know exactly what I'm talking about, she said. You didn't build what you built in the last 2 years without help, and you know where the help came from. I'm not asking whether you knew what you were involved in. I'm telling you that the man who helped you has decided you are a liability and has most likely already given instructions to have you killed. She kept her voice level, flat, the same voice she'd used at the restaurant when she'd told him to let go of her arm. His name. The silence on the other end of the line was the silence of a man whose self-image was colliding very hard with a reality he'd been building walls against. Moretti, Elias said. The word came out rough, like something dragged. His name is Cassian Moretti. He said he was a business consultant with European connections. He said, a pause. He said he'd known your family. He did know my family, Serena said. Serena, he also killed my grandfather. And tonight he has disappeared from a locked cabin on this vessel. And I need you to understand that the people who have been driving you are not taking you somewhere safe. They are taking you somewhere convenient. She looked at Lorenzo. Put the driver on. A shuffling, then the driver's voice. Yes. Your name, she said. A pause. Renko. Renko. Who gave you your assignment tonight? A longer pause. The kind of pause that contains a calculation. Mr. Victor, the man said. Victor, who was standing 6 feet away from her in the corridor outside an empty cabin. She looked at Victor. Victor's face was arranged in the expression of a man listening carefully to a developing situation. His hands were at his sides. His body language was composed and professional. He met her gaze with the direct attentiveness of a man who had been Lorenzo's most trusted operative for 11 years, and who had, possibly, been something else entirely for a portion of those 11 years. Victor was the 3rd compromised security personnel. She looked at the phone in her hand. She looked at Victor. She said into the phone very clearly, Renko, do not stop this vehicle for any reason. Drive until I call you again. If anyone in that vehicle tells you to stop, you don't stop. She ended the call. She looked at Lorenzo. Lorenzo was looking at Victor. The corridor was narrow, and the 3 of them were in it, and the vessel was moving through dark water. And somewhere aboard, a 68-year-old man who had killed her grandfather and dismantled her marriage and spent 5 years waiting to force her to her knees was moving through the same ship, free, with 3 fewer obstacles between him and whatever he had decided to do next. Victor moved first, not toward a weapon. He was too experienced to make that kind of obvious committed error. He moved toward the corridor junction, the turn that led toward the vessel's secondary access points, the service passages that ran parallel to the main corridors. Lorenzo caught him by the collar with one hand. Victor's elbow came back hard, catching Lorenzo across the jaw, and Lorenzo staggered but kept his grip, and the two men went into the corridor wall with a sound that shook the paneling, and Serena stepped back and pulled the door to cabin 7 fully open to give them space, and then she was running, not toward them, but past them, toward the service passage Victor had been moving for, because Victor was not the objective. Cassian was the objective. And Cassian had known about the service passages, had known about the vessel's layout, because Cassian had been aboard this vessel multiple times in the last 5 years, and had spent those visits the way he spent all his time in any operational environment, learning the architecture of the space with the patience of a man who understood that architecture was survival. She hit the service passage at full stride, shouldered the door open. The passage was dark and narrow, barely wide enough for one person, running along the port side of the hull, with the rumble of the engines transmitted directly through the metal plating underfoot. Emergency lighting only, red-tinted, casting everything in the color of a darkroom. She stood still for a moment, listened. Ahead of her, in the direction of the bow, she heard the sound of a door. She ran toward it. The door at the end of the service passage opened onto the engine room access platform. Serena knew it before she reached it because the sound changed. The muffled engine rumble that had been traveling through the hull, plating directly into her feet, became something physical and total. A wall of noise that hit her when she pushed through the door and stopped her for half a second while her body adjusted to the assault of it. Heat, sound, vibration. The engine room of a vessel this size was not one room but a series of interconnected compartments, steel walkways over machinery, the smell of fuel and hot metal, and the particular industrial humidity that had no equivalent anywhere outside of spaces like this. Emergency lighting here too, but supplemented by the operational lighting of the machinery itself. Gauges and displays and status panels throwing amber and green across the walkways in moving patterns as the engines cycled through their rhythms. She stepped onto the upper walkway. Below her, through the steel mesh of the grating, the main drive systems, 2 enormous marine diesels running at cruise power, their housings streaked with grease and condensation, the floor around them pooled with standing water from the cooling systems. The noise was so complete it pressed against thought. She had to breathe deliberately through it. She scanned the walkway. Movement, left. Below her, on the lower service platform, where the secondary systems ran, pumps, electrical panels, the backup generator housing. A figure moving fast along the platform toward the stern section, toward the emergency exit ladder that ran up through the hull to the aft deck. Cassian. Even from this angle and this light she knew him. The posture, the economy of movement, the way he navigated the space without hesitation, which told her he had been in this room before, had learned it, had prepared for exactly this route. She moved. The walkway ran above and parallel to the lower platform, connected by a steel staircase at the midpoint. She hit the stairs at speed, her hand on the rail because the mesh was wet from condensation, and a fall here would end this, and she was not going to fall. She took the stairs 2 at a time, hit the lower platform, and the gap between them was now 30 feet and closing. Cassian heard her, or felt the platform vibration change, or saw movement in his peripheral vision, and turned. In the operational lighting of the engine room, his face was all shadow and green amber, which should have made him harder to read and didn't, because she knew his face too well, had been reading it for 34 years. What was on it was not guilt, not fear. It was something she'd never seen there before in all those years, and it took her a moment to name it because she'd never had occasion to look for it. Relief. As though this being seen, being caught, being in this room with her, was something he had been waiting for. She stopped 6 feet from him. The noise of the engines was so complete that she had to pitch her voice differently to cut through it, less projection than placement. "Where are you going?" she said. "Stern ladder," he said. "There's a rigid inflatable in the aft housing. I had it stocked 3 days ago." "3 days ago," she said. "Before I arrived. I prepared for several outcomes." His voice was what it had always been, measured, low, completely in control of the breath that produced it. This was one of them. "You're not getting to the ladder," she said. "Serena." He said her name the way he always had, with the specific weight of someone who had watched her become what she was and felt, genuinely felt, some form of proprietary attachment to the process. "Step aside." "Tell me why," she said. He looked at her. The engines ran. The walkway trembled faintly underfoot. Water dripped somewhere in the machinery below with the irregular rhythm of something that was not quite broken. Your grandfather was going to destroy everything we built, he said. Everything. 40 years of work. He had decided in the last year of his life to dismantle the organization. Not transition it, not restructure it, dismantle. Liquidate the assets, scatter the people, burn the infrastructure. He called it legacy. He called it not wanting blood on your hands. Cashin's eyes didn't leave her face. He didn't consult me. He didn't consult anyone. He had made his decision, and he was going to execute it unilaterally, the way he did everything. And you killed him for it, she said. I preserved what he built, Cassian said. Those are different things. They're not, she said. He had no right. He built it. The words came out of her harder than she intended, cutting through the engine noise with a force that surprised her. He built every piece of it. He had every right. And you? Cassian's voice didn't rise. It never rose. You ran away from it. You spent 5 years pretending to be ordinary while his legacy sat without an heir, and every wolf in Europe tested its fences. Do you know how many times in 5 years I held this organization together through things I should not have had to hold alone? His jaw tightened. The first crack. The first visible pressure. I did not destroy your grandfather. I continued his life's work after he lost his nerve. You manipulated my marriage, she said. You found Elias before I did. You engineered the introduction. A pause. Yes. Why? Because you needed to fail, he said. It came out flat and certain, the delivery of a man stating something he had concluded long ago and made peace with. You needed to try the ordinary life and have it collapse, because until it collapsed, you were never coming back, and the organization needed you back, and I needed... He stopped. Something moved in his face. You needed me compromised, she said. You needed me to come back damaged and raw and grieving a marriage so that I would need your guidance, so that you would continue to be the person holding the center. He didn't answer. That was the plan, she said, not to stop me from leading, to lead through me. The relief she'd seen on his face when she'd caught him, she understood it now. This conversation, the exposure after years of management. There was a kind of relief in it that was genuine and that had nothing to do with surrender. It was the relief of a man who had been maintaining a fiction for so long that the end of it, whatever form the end took, was something his body needed the way lungs need air. You loved my grandfather, she said. Yes, he said. And for the first time in those 2 letters, something cracked. Not dramatically, not tears, not visible distress, just a fractional shift in the control around his mouth, a tightening that was not strength. And you killed him. I made a decision, he said, the way he taught me to make decisions, clearly, without sentiment, for the good of the whole. The way he taught you, she said, and then you used what he taught you to end him. She watched him absorb that. She watched the absorption move through him, slow and complete, the way something heavy settles into water. Behind her, she heard the engine room access door open. She did not turn around. She kept her eyes on Cassian, on his hands, on the 6 feet between them on the wet platform. Serena. Lorenzo's voice from behind her, cutting through the engine noise, followed by the sound of more than one person on the metal stairs. Cassian reached into his jacket. She moved before she had consciously decided to move, forward and left, closing the distance between them from 6 feet to 2, in the time it took the situation to change, and she had her hand on his wrist before he had the weapon fully clear, and they were very close, close enough to breathe the same air, and she could feel the bones of his wrist under her grip and the resistance in them, the wiry, sustained strength of a man who was 68 and lean and had lived a life that kept you physically capable. Don't, she said. One word, directly into his face. He looked at her. The weapon, a compact pistol, small-framed, was halfway between his jacket and level, her grip on his wrist holding it in the liminal space between potential and action. Lorenzo was on the platform now. She heard him. She heard more footsteps, multiple, careful, the controlled approach of people who were armed and aware that they were approaching a situation where shooting was not the first available option because of geometry and the person in the way. It's over, she said to Cassian, quietly. Through the engine noise, quiet, just between them. You're on a vessel in open water. There is nowhere to exit that you control. The plan failed. Plans fail, he said. His voice was still steady. His pulse, under her fingers on his wrist, was elevated but not panicked. The pulse of a man running hard, not a man breaking. The organization survives plans failing. I've seen it survive worse than this. Not this, she said. You can't prosecute me, he said. Not through any channel that doesn't expose the family. You know that. Whatever you do with me, it has to happen outside legitimate systems. And outside legitimate systems, I have relationships, resources, contingencies. The Luxembourg vehicle, she said. The 11 million. The Zurich audit report. The communication log. She watched his eyes process each item. The connection to Petrov. Your handler below you. We'll have a name for them inside 48 hours. And that name leads back to you through documentation that exists in multiple secured locations that are not on this vessel and not accessible to anyone who answers to you. She held his gaze. The contingencies are gone, Cassian. Something shifted. Something she had never seen shift in him across 34 years and the full range of situations in which she had observed him operating. He released the weapon. Not dropped. Released. Deliberate. The choice of a man who was not going to give up a weapon because force compelled it, only because he decided to. She took it from his hand. She stepped back. He stood on the platform without the weapon, and he looked, for the first time in her memory, like a man his age. Lorenzo took him by the arm. His face was hard and closed, and there was blood on his jaw from where Victor's elbow had connected, and none of the hardness was about the blood. He looked at Cassian with the face of a man looking at the person who killed his uncle, and he did not say anything, which was its own form of speech. They moved off the platform. Serena held the weapon at her side. She stood in the engine room for a moment alone, the engines running underneath and around her, the heat and noise and the standing water, and the equipment displays cycling through their steady operational rhythms, indifferent to everything above them. Her hand was not shaking. She noted this with the detached precision she applied to things about herself that she wasn't sure were good signs. She had just taken a weapon from a man who had killed her grandfather and managed her marriage and tried to position himself as the power behind her return to the organization, and her hand was not shaking, and she wasn't sure that was the response of a healthy person so much as the response of a person who had grown up in rooms that produced exactly this kind of moment and had been shaped, without her full consent, to navigate them. She followed them out. The vessel's main salon had been converted, in the 40 minutes she'd been in the service passage and engine room, into something closer to a command center. 3 of Lorenzo's confirmed loyal security team at the communications console. The radar screen visible from where she stood, the parallel contact that had been following them was gone, had broken off 20 minutes ago, its function presumably complete. 2 men stood outside the closed salon door that now, from the inside, had Cassian Moretti seated at the pale wood table with his hands visible on the surface, and his face wearing the arrangement of a man who had decided that the next phase required patience. Victor was somewhere being handled. She didn't ask for specifics. She sat down across from Cassian. Lorenzo stood at the far end of the table, arms crossed, saying nothing. The Vero handler, she said. The person below you who interfaced with Petrov. I told you we'll have a name in 48 hours. That's true. I'd rather have it in 48 minutes. Cassian looked at her. There's nothing left to protect, she said. The Luxembourg vehicle is going to be unwound. The accounts are going to be frozen. Petrov is going to be approached independently of anything you tell me, and when he's approached, he's going to give up every name he has, because that is what Petrov's type does when the organization above them dissolves. She set the pistol on the table, not as a threat. She pushed it to the side, away from both of them, because she wanted him to understand that this was not a conversation happening under that kind of pressure. I'm asking you to give me the name because it closes something faster. Because it means the people Petrov has been running in New York and Geneva can be identified and contained before they do something that costs someone who doesn't deserve the cost. That's the only reason I'm asking. Cassian looked at the table, at his hands on it. Her name is Adara Sen, he said. She operates out of Vienna. She has a commercial import business as cover. She's been the interface to Petrov for 14 months. Contact information. He gave it, a phone number, an address, a name of a business. He gave it in the flat recitative of a man clearing a desk, not cooperating exactly, but concluding. Why did you keep the shoe? She said. He looked up. In the cabin, she said. One of your security contact's boots. You left it. Why? He held her gaze for a moment. I didn't leave it intentionally, he said. He struggled more than I expected. She didn't ask what that meant specifically. She filed it. Her burner phone rang. She stepped away from the table to answer it. Luxembourg vehicle, said the woman's voice. Dry, precise, the voice of her financial contact who had once described herself as the most expensive person Serena had never formally hired. Beneficial owner is a family trust registered in Liechtenstein. The settler of the trust died 4 years ago. The trust continues under a successor trustee arrangement. The successor trustee is a natural person, Italian national, currently resident in Monaco. A pause. The name on the trustee registration is not Cassian Moretti. Serena's hand tightened on the phone. What name? She said. Her contact said the name. Serena stood very still. She turned slowly and looked at the salon, at the table, at Cassian sitting with his hands flat on the pale wood, and at Lorenzo standing at the far end with his arms crossed, and at the two men on the door, and she ran the name her contact had just given her through every file of her memory. The financial documents, the log, the Zurich audit report, the photograph Lorenzo had shown her in the corridor outside the salon 3 hours ago. The photograph of Cassian Moretti. The photograph Lorenzo had produced from his jacket when she'd asked him who was responsible. She thought about the sequence. The photograph first, before documentation, before the drive, before the audit report. A photograph which proved nothing except proximity. And then the documentation, provided by Lorenzo, interpreted by Lorenzo, sequenced by Lorenzo, in an order that told her a story. She thought about who had access to the dormant operational account. 4 people. Lorenzo. Herself. The Zurich administrator. Cassian. She thought about Victor. Victor, who had been Lorenzo's most trusted operative for 11 years. Victor, who had been in the security station with Lorenzo when she'd arrived there. Victor, who had made the move toward the service corridor rather than engaging directly. She thought about Lorenzo's face in the corridor outside cabin 7 when they'd found it empty. The expression she'd interpreted as a man experiencing failure. The expression that could also, she now understood, be a man experiencing a plan departing from its intended shape. She thought about Cassian in this room, seated, compliant, giving her a name in Vienna and an address and a phone number. Too fast. Too clean. The compliance of a man who has calculated that compliance is the correct move, not the compliance of a man who is broken. She thought about what Cassian had said on the platform, about her needing to fail, about the ordinary life collapsing, about the organization needing her back. All of it true. All of it building the picture of a man guilty of everything Lorenzo had said. The name her contact had given her was not a name she associated with Cassian. It was a name she associated with the early organizational structure, the pre-grandfather era, the formation period, the network that had existed before her grandfather had taken control and restructured everything around himself. A name from before Cassian, a name that belonged to Lorenzo's father's generation, a name that Lorenzo would know intimately and that Cassian would know only in historical context. She ended the call. She looked at the room. Lorenzo was watching her with the attentiveness of a man reading a face. She had told him in the corridor before they'd entered the salon the first time that he needed to put his grief somewhere else, that he had grief all over his face. She had interpreted that grief as grief about Cassian. She was no longer certain what it was grief about. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was level. She looked at the men on the door. "I need some air. I'm going to the aft deck." "I'll come with you," Lorenzo said. "I'd like a few minutes alone," she said. "I'll be on the aft deck." He held her gaze. She held his. "Of course," he said, and smiled, the way he had always smiled at her. The smile of a man who had known her since before she understood what the world was. The smile of family. She walked to the salon door. The men opened it for her. She moved into the corridor and kept her pace steady, unremarkable, the walk of a woman who needed air and was going to the deck to get it. She did not go to the aft deck. She went back to the security station. The 3 loyal team members were still at their posts. She entered, closed the door behind her, and put her back against it. "I need to reach the Zurich administrator directly," she said. "Not through any system on this vessel. Do you have an independent satellite uplink that Lorenzo does not control?" The senior of the 3, a woman named Brecht, compact and deliberate, 12 years with the organization, looked at her. "There's an emergency beacon system," Brecht said, "secondary to the main comms. It has a data channel." "Can it reach Switzerland?" "It can reach anywhere." Then I need to use it, Serena said. Right now. Brecht looked at her for 1 second. 1 second of assessment, direct and unblinking, the look of a person deciding where they stand. Yes, Miss Vale, she said. Serena sat down at the secondary console. The vessel moved through the dark water. Somewhere above her, on the aft deck she hadn't gone to, Lorenzo De Luca was waiting for her with the patience of a man who had been patient for a very long time, who had built everything he needed around a single variable, her return, and who had not yet understood that the variable had resolved differently than he'd planned. She opened the data channel. She began to type. And in the main salon behind 2 men on a door, Cassian Moretti sat with his hands flat on a pale wood table and his eyes on the middle distance. And the expression on his face was not the expression of a man who was finished. It was the expression of a man who was waiting for the person in this building, in this vessel, who was actually as intelligent as he was to figure out what he'd been trying to tell her since the engine room, when he had stood 6 feet away from her on a wet platform with a weapon half drawn and had looked at her with something she'd named relief. Not relief at being caught. Relief that she had arrived. Relief that the right person was finally on the vessel, asking the right questions and moving in the right direction, before anyone could stop her from getting there. The Zurich administrator picked up on the second ring. His name was Holst. 53 years old, 19 years with the organization, a man so methodical that he kept handwritten logs of his digital transactions in a leather notebook that he replaced every 6 months and stored in a fireproof cabinet. Serena had met him twice. Both times he had shaken her hand with the careful formality of someone who understood exactly who she was and chose to treat that knowledge as a professional fact rather than a source of either deference or anxiety. She had respected him for that immediately. "Miss Vale," he said. No surprise in his voice. Either he'd been expecting her call or he'd trained himself out of audible surprise long ago. "The audit report you sent to Lorenzo," she said. "The dormant operational account. The transfers to Luxembourg." "Yes." "How did you identify the originating authorization?" A pause. The careful pause of a precise man, verifying internally that he was being asked what he thought he was being asked. "The transfers were authorized through the account's dual control system," he said. "Each transfer required 2 authorizations, one from the account administrator, myself, and one from an account principal." Serena's hand tightened on the handset. "You authorized them," she said. "I did not," Holst said. The flatness of it was absolute. "My credentials were used. That's a different thing. Someone with access to my authentication token authorized the transfers from my side. I discovered this during the routine review because the token usage timestamps did not correspond to my working hours." A pause. "I flagged this in my report. I'm concerned it may not have been communicated to you in the summary." Brecht was watching her from the console to her left. Serena kept her eyes on the secondary terminal's screen, on the data channel, on the small physical anchor of the keyboard under her hands. "Who received your full report?" she said. "Mr. De Luca," Holst said, "directly and only, per his instruction. He told me the matter was sensitive and to communicate through no other channel. And the account principal authorization, the second signature on each transfer, whose credentials were used on that side?" Another pause, longer this time. "Mr. Moretti's," Holst said, which is why the report framed the situation as it did. "His credentials were the visible authorization on the principal side. My credentials were used without my knowledge on the administrator side." He stopped. "Miss Vale, are you telling me that Mr. Moretti's credentials were also used without his knowledge?" She didn't answer that directly. "Who has the technical capability to spoof dual control authentication on that account system?" "Someone with deep familiarity with the system architecture," Holst said. "The authentication is not standard commercial software. It was custom built for us approximately 8 years ago. The people who understand it at the level required to spoof it are—" He stopped himself, and she could hear him running the list in his own mind. "Very few," he said. "The original development team, which is external and has been disbanded, and the people within our organization who were involved in the implementation and have maintained access since." "Who oversaw the implementation?" "Mr. De Luca," Holst said. "He managed the entire security architecture project personally. It was before my time at the senior level, but I have the project records." The data channel terminal in front of her was showing its connection status: active, encrypted, routed through the emergency beacon system that ran on an independent power circuit with its own antenna array on the vessel's superstructure. A system Lorenzo had not mentioned to her when he'd walked her through the vessel's capabilities. A system she'd only known about because Brecht had told her. A system that Lorenzo had not, in 8 years of using this vessel for sensitive operations, ever mentioned existed. "Holst," she said, "I need you to do something immediately, before this call ends." "Yes." "Access the account's full authorization log, not the summary I assume was in the report, the complete raw log, and send it to an external address." She gave him the address of her financial contact. "Encrypted under the Vale family private key, not the organizational key." The Vale family key is registered in a Liechtenstein notary's office and cannot be accessed by anyone currently on this vessel. Can you do that in the next 5 minutes? 3, Holst said. "I'll call you when it's sent." She ended the call. She looked at Brecht. "How many people know about this secondary communication system?" Brecht considered it. "Vessel crew, for emergency certification purposes. Myself and the 2 people with me. The Maritime Authority registration requires it to be disclosed to flag state, but not to operators." A beat. "Mr. DeLuca has never referenced it in any operational briefing I've attended. How long have you worked for Lorenzo directly?" 7 years? "And before that?" "I came from Miss Vale's grandfather's personal security detail," Brecht said. "I was assigned to Mr. DeLuca's operational team after the grandfather passed." Assigned. Not requested, not chosen. Assigned by the organizational transition, which had been managed in those early months after her grandfather's death by the person who had taken charge of continuity, by Cassian Moretti. Serena stood up from the console. "I need to go back to the salon," she said. "I need you to keep this channel open, and I need you to do something that is going to seem outside your normal operational parameters." Brecht waited. "If I am not back in contact with you within 20 minutes, Serena said, I need you to use this channel to contact the Zurich office and instruct Holst to file the complete audit documentation with the 3 external parties listed in the Vale family's legal standing instructions. You'll find the standing instructions registered with the same Liechtenstein notary. The 3 parties are all outside the organization, and the filing cannot be recalled once sent." She looked at Brecht directly. "Do you understand what I'm asking?" "You're asking me to create an external accountability mechanism," Brecht said. "That activates automatically if you're prevented from returning." "Yes." Brecht nodded once. 20 minutes, she said. "Starting now." Serena left the security station. In the corridor, she paused for exactly 2 seconds, her hand on the wall, feeling the vessel's movement through her palm. The long, slow pitch and recover of open water, the engine's steady insistence beneath it. She had been awake for 21 hours. She could feel that now in the specific heaviness behind her eyes, the slightly disconnected quality of thought that came with extended operational alertness, the body running on something thinner than sleep. She had worked through worse. She told herself this and believed it approximately halfway. She walked back to the main salon. The 2 men on the door let her in. The room was as she'd left it, Cassian at the table, Lorenzo at the far end, standing. The difference was that Lorenzo had turned to face the door when she entered, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man who had spent the time she was absent running calculations and had arrived at a result he was not satisfied with. She closed the door behind her. She walked to the table. She sat down across from Cassian. She set nothing on the table, put nothing between them, gave the moment no props because props were for people who needed to manage the atmosphere. She was done managing the atmosphere. She looked at Lorenzo. "The Luxembourg Trust," she said. "The beneficial owner. Tell me the name." Lorenzo's expression didn't change. "Cassian Moretti," he said, "as I told you." "That's not the name on the trustee registration," she said. The room was quiet for 3 seconds. The engines. The water. The air conditioning's low note. "Who did you speak to?" Lorenzo said. "Someone independent," she said. "Someone without organizational access." She kept her eyes on him. "The registered successor trustee of the Luxembourg vehicle is Marco DeLuca, your father's brother, dead 11 years. The trust was established during his lifetime and has continued under a succession arrangement you would have inherited authority over at his death." She let that sit for exactly 1 beat. "Your family's money, Lorenzo, moved through an account that was spoofed to look like Cassian's authorization." Lorenzo was still. The quality of his stillness was different from Cassian's stillness. Cassian went still the way a very controlled person goes still, the stillness of will over instinct. Lorenzo's stillness was the stillness of a man who has heard something he wasn't certain he was going to hear and is taking the moment before response to build whatever comes next. "That's not," he started. "Holst told me you managed the authentication system's implementation personally," she said. 8 years ago. Custom architecture, small circle of people with deep technical access. Sufficient access to spoof dual control authorization and make it look like 2 other people signed off on transfers that actually went to a vehicle in your family's name. Serena. His voice had changed. The warmth was still there. That was the thing. Even now, the warmth was in his voice because it was not a performed warmth. She had been right about that. It was genuine, which made it the most complicated thing in the room. "You're exhausted. You've been awake for—" "Don't," she said. He stopped. "How long?" she said. He looked at her across the salon, across the pale wood table and the documents and the tactical map, and 5 years of absence and 34 years before that, and she watched him decide. "The transfers began 14 months ago," he said, "after the Geneva probe, after I understood that someone was testing the organization's defenses and that we were more exposed than I'd realized." He moved from the far end of the table, slowly, and sat down at the table's side between them, equidistant, like a man joining a conversation rather than controlling one. "The 11 million was not misappropriation, Serena. It was operational capital, moved to a vehicle I controlled because I did not trust the standard channels. I intended to use it to fund the independent investigation into the Geneva breach, into your grandfather's death." "Without telling Cassian," she said. "Without telling anyone," he said, "because I did not know who I could trust." "So you moved $11 million through a fraudulently authorized account transfer using Cassian's spoofed credentials," she said, "as operational capital for an investigation you were running alone, which produced evidence pointing to Cassian as the primary suspect." Lorenzo held her gaze. "Yes." "Do you hear how that sounds?" "I hear how it sounds," he said. "I also know what I found. The communication log is real. The Varro connection is real. Cassian's knowledge of the account architecture is real. I didn't manufacture the evidence against him, Serena. I found it, and then I moved money through a method I should not have used because I was trying to operate without exposure in a situation where I did not know the full picture." From across the table, Cassian spoke for the first time since she'd returned to the room. "He's telling the truth about that," Cassian said. She looked at him. "The communication log is real," Cassian said. "The Varro connection is real. I did interface with Petrov's people. I did run an operation that touched the Geneva accounts." His voice was the same as it had always been, measured, low, each word placed with the care of a man who had never had the luxury of saying things he didn't mean. "What I did not do is kill your grandfather." The room waited. "Then what did you do?" she said. "I was trying to save him," Cassian said. "Your grandfather knew he was being poisoned. Not cardiac arrest. Slow accumulation, compound that mimics cardiac deterioration. He knew for 4 months before he died. He told me, and only me. And he asked me to find who was doing it without raising an alarm inside the organization, because he believed whoever was responsible was inside the inner circle." He looked at his hands on the table. "He asked me to continue as though nothing had changed, to give the person doing it confidence that the plan was working, to use that confidence to identify them." A pause. "He died before I finished. The compound's progression was faster than his doctors estimated." "Who was poisoning him?" she said. Cassian looked at Lorenzo. Lorenzo's face, for the first time tonight, showed something that was not calculation or control. It showed something old and buried and terrible, the face beneath the face that most people never reveal in rooms with other people present. "Your grandfather's physician," Lorenzo said. His voice was low. "A man named Reuter. He was paid, over a period of 18 months, from an account I have been trying to trace. I found Reuter 6 months ago. I confronted him. He confirmed the source of his payments before—" He stopped. "Before he was no longer available to confirm anything further." "Before he died," Serena said. "Yes." "How?" "He died of a cardiac event," Lorenzo said, and the specific flatness of his voice on those words told her exactly what she needed to know about how Reuter had died. and who had decided it. The three of them sat in the silence of that for a moment. The account that paid Reuter, she said. Where does it trace? That's what the independent investigation has been trying to determine, Lorenzo said. It's the same vehicle structure as the Varo connection, Cyprus Shell, Dubai intermediary. The beneficial ownership at the end is obscured in a way I haven't been able to fully crack. He reached into the folder in front of him and slid a single page across to her. But 3 weeks ago I found a name. Not the beneficial owner, a signatory. Someone who signed operational documents for the Cyprus Shell early in its existence, before the obscuring layers were fully in place. She looked at the page. The name was one she knew, not from the organization's inner circle, not from the financial architecture, not from any of the documents she'd spent the last several hours reading. From a conversation, 12 years ago. In a hospital waiting room, Cassian sitting beside her while her mother was in surgery, and Cassian mentioning, in the way that people mention things in the stretched time of waiting rooms, a business associate from his earlier career. A man he had worked with before her grandfather's organization, back when Cassian had been younger and less careful about the associations he made. A man he had described as brilliant and dangerous, and from whom he had deliberately distanced himself when he understood what the man was capable of. A name she had never heard in any other context. Adara Sen, she said slowly, the handler in Vienna. She works for him. Yes, Cassian said. And he's been running this from outside the organization entirely, she said. Someone who was never inside it, who used Varo as a cutout, used Reuter as an instrument, used the Geneva probe to create noise, and was waiting for the organization to be weakened enough, by your grandfather's death, by my absence, by whatever internal conflict developed in the vacuum, to move on it. His name is Gregor Halm, Lorenzo said. He's 71 years old. He runs a private intelligence firm based in Zurich, legitimate on its surface. He and Cassian have history. I introduced him to your grandfather once, Cassian said. 22 years ago. Your grandfather declined to work with him and made his reasons clear. Halm has been patient. He looked at Serena. Everything you found tonight, the Luxembourg vehicle, the authentication spoofing, the photograph Lorenzo showed you in the corridor, was designed to make you look at us. At people you already knew, people already inside your field of suspicion, to keep you turning inward while Halm moved from outside. She sat with the full architecture of it, the thing she was assembling in real time from the pieces the last several hours had provided, and she understood the scale of it, the patience of it, the 22 years of patient waiting by a man she had never heard of until 20 minutes ago. The two men outside the marina, she said, watching to confirm I'd arrived. Halm's people, Lorenzo said, not Varo's, direct. And the boat that followed us. Same. He knows I'm here. He knows the three of us are on this vessel. He knows whatever Drazen and Victor told him before we contained them. She thought about the timeline, the boat breaking off 20 minutes ago. Halm, somewhere in a Zurich office or a private residence, receiving confirmation, running his own calculations. He's going to move tonight, she said, before we have time to consolidate. He already has, Lorenzo said. He picked up his phone from the table and turned it to face her. A text message from a number she didn't recognize, received 14 minutes ago. 4 words. Elias Mercer. Found them. Her stomach dropped. The vehicle, she said. Renko. I told him to change course and call me back. He never called back, Lorenzo said. We've been trying to reach the vehicle for the last 40 minutes. She stood up. In the next 30 seconds, she crossed the salon, opened the door without looking at the men on it, moved into the corridor, back to the security station at a pace that was not running but faster than any other speed, and pushed through the door. Brecht looked up immediately. 17 minutes remaining, Brecht said. I need the vehicle's last GPS position, Serena said. Renko's phone, the vehicle itself, anything. And I need to know if there is any small craft aboard this vessel, the rigid inflatable in the aft housing that Cassian mentioned. The inflatable is there, Brecht said. I confirmed it when we left the harbor. Range. 60 nautical miles at operational speed. How far are we from the coast? Brecht checked the navigation display. 31 nautical miles. Serena turned around. Lorenzo and Cassian were both in the doorway of the security station. Lorenzo had followed her, and Cassian, apparently no longer being held in the salon with any particular effectiveness, had followed Lorenzo, which told her something about the nature of Cassian's earlier cooperation. She looked at Cassian first. "Halm has Elias," she said. Cassian's face did not change dramatically, but something moved behind his eyes, a rapid internal sequencing she recognized as a man running tactical analysis. "He's using him to confirm you'll move," he said. "If you go after Mercer, you leave the vessel. If you leave the vessel, you're exposed on open water with limited support. He can intercept between here and the coast." "Yes," she said. "So you don't go?" "I'm going," she said. "Serena, he didn't know I existed when any of this started," she said. "He was in that restaurant because someone told him for 2 years that his wife was ordinary and his marriage was failing. He signed papers he was handed because he's an arrogant man who trusted a stranger's advice and had no idea what the advice was serving." She looked at Cassian, then at Lorenzo. "He cannot die for that. I will not allow it." The silence in the security station had a specific quality, the silence of two very experienced men absorbing the decision of a third person and recognizing that the decision was not negotiable. "Then we go with you," Lorenzo said. "You can't both go," she said. "Someone has to hold the vessel. Someone has to ensure the external documentation files if this goes wrong." She looked at Brecht. "Brecht stays. Her countdown continues regardless of what I tell her until I am back on this vessel with Elias Mercer." She looked at Lorenzo. "You stay. You manage whatever Halm tries on this end." "And me?" Cassian said. She looked at him. 68 years old, lean, with a face that had told her everything and nothing over the course of this night. A man who had run an independent operation inside the organization her grandfather built, who had spoofed nothing and moved nothing, and who had sat in a locked cabin waiting for the right person to ask the right questions. Because the only way to draw Halm fully into the open was to let him believe the organization was destroying itself from within. "You're coming with me," she said. His eyebrow rose fractionally. "You know Halm," she said. "You know how he operates. You know what he'll have prepared and where the gaps in it are." "I'm 68 years old. I know," she said. "Try to keep up." The rigid inflatable was in the aft housing as confirmed, a serious piece of equipment, not a recreational craft. 8 meters, twin outboards, the kind of hull that moved over open water in conditions that would stop most small craft. Someone had stocked it 3 days ago with the thoroughness of a man who prepared for several outcomes. She found water, emergency medical supplies, communications equipment, and in a dry bag secured under the forward thwart, a case she opened to find 3 weapons and ammunition cached with the same unhurried preparation. She took one. She looked at Cassian. He took one without comment. The coast was 31 nautical miles. At the inflatable's operational speed, it was 45 minutes of cold water and wind and the open Atlantic between them and the mainland. And for all 45 of those minutes, she stood at the helm with the throttle open and the hull lifting at speed and the spray coming over the bow in sheets. And Cassian sat aft with his weapon on his knee and his eyes on the water around them, and neither of them spoke because there was nothing to say that the engines weren't saying already. The vehicle's last GPS position had come through from Brecht 7 minutes after they launched. A warehouse district on the southern edge of the port area, 3 kilometers from the secondary location Renko had been routed away from. Halm's people had been waiting on the alternate routes, had anticipated the change of course, had resources positioned across multiple approaches. 22 years of patience, and Serena had been back in the organization for less than 12 hours. She cut the engines 400 meters offshore and let the inflatable drift in under the ambient noise of the port. Cold. Dark. The industrial smell of the waterfront, diesel and salt, and the particular flatness of water in a sheltered commercial harbor. They came ashore on a concrete landing below a service road. She checked her weapon. Cassian checked his. They moved without discussion, in the way of people who have separately spent their lives in situations that require this kind of movement and don't need to rehearse the language of it. The warehouse district was 3 interconnected blocks of mid-century industrial buildings, half of them dark at this hour, working facilities for the port's secondary cargo operations. She had the last GPS coordinate on her phone. She moved toward it. Cassian touched her arm once, stopped her. He pointed. A vehicle, black, idling, parked against the warehouse wall 60 meters ahead, engine running, a man visible in the driver's seat. 2 options, and she chose correctly. They came at the vehicle from opposite sides, and the driver saw Cassian first and reached for something, and Cassian opened the door before he could reach it, and the conversation was over before it required anything further. The building was a transit warehouse, high ceiling, empty except for cargo pallets stacked along the walls, and a cleared space in the center where the floor was bare concrete under inadequate lighting, a construction lamp on a stand throwing hard shadows. 3 men standing. 1 person sitting, zip-tied to a metal chair, a cut above his eye that had bled down his face and dried there, his jacket torn at the shoulder where he'd been handled into the chair. Elias Mercer looked up when they came through the door. He looked at Serena. He looked at Cassian. He looked back at Serena, and the expression on his face was not the expression of a man she had been married to, because the man she had been married to had never looked like this. Stripped of everything, the arrogance gone, the performance gone, just the raw human residue of a person who has spent several hours understanding how badly he'd misjudged the nature of the world he'd been operating in. The 3 men moved, 2 toward Serena, 1 toward Cassian, and the next 90 seconds were very loud and very close and involved the hard concrete floor twice, and the cargo pallet edge once, and the specific animal clarity of a body that has stopped thinking and is operating entirely on what it was trained for. She came up from the floor with blood on her lip where she'd caught an elbow and her weapon in her hand. 1 man down. Cassian had the second against the wall. The third was on the floor between her and the chair where Elias sat. Standing in the doorway through which they'd entered, unhurried, with the composed posture of a man who had expected this outcome and found it neither surprising nor particularly troubling, was a person she had never seen before but recognized immediately from everything she knew about him. Gregor Halm was 71 years old. He was shorter than she'd expected, compact, with white hair and pale eyes, and a quality of absolute stillness that was nothing like Cassian's stillness and nothing like Lorenzo's. It was the stillness of a man who had decided, at some point long ago, that the world owed him specific things and had been collecting on that debt ever since with the patience of someone who had made their peace with the timeline. He had a weapon. It was pointed at Elias. "Miss Vale," he said. His voice was lightly accented, educated, the voice of a man who had cultivated himself deliberately and was aware of the cultivation. "You're faster than I expected. I respect that." He looked at Cassian. "And you brought him. That's interesting." "Put the weapon down," she said. "I don't think so," he said pleasantly. "I think instead we're going to have a brief conversation about the organization's future, because that is a conversation that has needed to happen for 22 years, and tonight seems to be the occasion for overdue conversations." "You've been waiting 22 years to have a conversation," she said. "That's what this is." "Your grandfather insulted me," he said. The pleasantness didn't change. It was the pleasantness of a man who had separated his emotions from his voice so long ago that the separation was now structural. "He told me I was not the kind of person the organization worked with. He was specific about his reasons. He was not wrong, incidentally. I am not that kind of person. But the manner of it." He paused. "He dismissed me in front of 3 people whose professional opinions I valued. 22 years ago." She looked at him, at the weapon aimed at Elias, at the distance between herself and Halm, which was 10 meters of open warehouse floor, which was not a distance she could close before a trigger was pulled. "You spent 22 years, she said, "and you killed a man, and you corrupted a physician, and you built a criminal infrastructure across 3 continents, and you used my marriage as an instrument, because my grandfather said you were not the kind of person he worked with." "The manner of it," Halm said again, as though she'd missed the point. "The manner," she repeated. She looked at Elias. Elias was looking at her with the expression of a man who has understood several things simultaneously, and is holding them all without adequate preparation for any of them. His hands were tied. There was blood on his face. He was frightened in the specific way that people are frightened when the fear is appropriate and they know it. She looked at Halm. She made the calculation that she'd been trained to make and that she'd spent 5 years trying not to need. Angle, distance, her weapon versus his, her body versus the 10 meters, and what the geometry permitted. "There's external documentation," she said to Halm, "filed in the last hour. Zurich auditor, Liechtenstein notary, 3 external parties. Everything. Your Cyprus shell, the Dubai intermediary, Reuters payments, the Geneva probe. It filed automatically 20 minutes ago. You cannot unfile it. Killing anyone in this room makes your situation worse." Halm considered this. The pleasant expression didn't change. "I'm 71 years old," he said. "The documentation concerned me less than you might imagine." "Then why are you still talking?" she said. Something moved in his eyes. The first departure from the composed pleasantness. Small and quickly controlled, but visible to her because she had spent the last several hours reading faces in inadequate light and had gotten very good at it tonight. She took 2 steps toward him. He adjusted the weapon from Elias toward her, which was what she needed. Cassian moved from her left. Not toward Halm, toward the construction lamp on its stand. He knocked it as he moved, the lamp swinging on its cord before toppling, the hard light swinging across the warehouse in a long arc, and then going dark as the stand hit the floor and the bulb broke, and the room dropped from harsh construction lighting into the dimness of whatever ambient port light came through the high windows. 2 seconds of recalibration for everyone in the room. She closed the distance in those 2 seconds. She had the weapon out of Halm's hand before he'd completed the swing back toward her, a combination of grip and leverage she hadn't used in 5 years, and which her body remembered with the precision of things learned under pressure. And then she had him by the collar and his back against the warehouse wall, and her forearm across his chest, and his own weapon somewhere behind her on the concrete floor. He was 71, and he was not weak, but she was 41, and tonight she was something harder than herself, and he was against the wall and staying there. She was breathing hard. She could hear it. She didn't try to control it. "I'm going to tell you something," she said to Halm. Her voice was not steady, and she didn't try to make it steady. "My grandfather was the best person I ever knew. He was also a man who ran a criminal organization for 40 years and made decisions that cost people things they didn't deserve to lose. He was both of those things at the same time. He was complicated, and he was real, and he was mine." She looked at Halm's face, pale and composed in the port light, 6 inches from her own. "And you ended him because he embarrassed you. That's what I'm going to carry from tonight. That it was that stupid. That 22 years of architecture and patience and damage came down to a moment at a table where someone looked at you and told you the truth about yourself." Halm said nothing. She stepped back. She looked at Cassian, who was standing in the dimness with his weapon held at his side and blood on his left hand from somewhere in the 90 seconds of activity that had preceded this. She looked at Elias. She walked to the chair and took the zip tie at his wrists and pulled until it broke, the cheap variety, breakable with sufficient force, and she had sufficient force tonight. He pulled his hands free and looked at them, looked at her, and she saw him open his mouth to say something, and she shook her head once. "Not now," she said. She took out her phone. She called Brecht. "We have him," she said. "Elias is with me. Send coordinates for extraction." "The documentation filed 11 minutes ago," Brecht said. All 3 external parties confirmed receipt. "Good," she said. She looked at the warehouse, at Halm against the wall, at the 3 men who were various degrees of incapacitated, at Cassian, who was looking at Halm with the expression of a man who had spent a year and a half running a covert operation inside his own organization to protect a woman he'd helped raise and a legacy he'd spent his life serving, and who was now standing in a dark warehouse on the wrong side of midnight, looking at the person who had made all of that necessary. Cassian said nothing to Halm. He turned away from him and looked at Serena. "Your grandfather would have found this excessive," he said. "He would have found it necessary," she said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive," Cassian said. "No," she said, "they're not." In the weeks that followed, the documentation did what documentation does when filed with the right parties under the right conditions. It moved through legal and financial systems with the grinding inevitability of things that have been properly set in motion. The Cyprus shell was unwound. The Dubai intermediaries' principles were identified. Adara Sen in Vienna was approached by parties she had not anticipated and made decisions under that approach that Serena did not need to be informed of in detail to understand the shape of. Gregor Halm was 71 years old and had spent 22 years building something that ended in a warehouse in 3 hours, and the weight of the documentation against him was sufficient that the remaining years of his life would be occupied with defending himself in jurisdictions that did not extend professional courtesies to private intelligence operators. The Vero Syndicate, without Halm's backing and Sen's management, contracted rapidly to its natural size, which was small. Lorenzo spent 2 weeks in conversation with Serena about the $11 million, the authentication spoofing, the photograph in the corridor, the sequence of information he'd provided, and the sequence he'd withheld. The conversations were not pleasant. She told him that she understood why he'd done what he'd done, and that understanding was not the same as acceptance, and that if he ever managed her information access again with the justification that he was protecting her, she would restructure his role in the organization in a way he would find clarifying. He accepted this without argument, which was its own form of apology. She did not fire him. The organization needed people who were effective, and Lorenzo was effective, and purity was a standard that the work did not permit. She held this as a fact without liking it. Cashin went back to his apartment in Rome and spent 3 weeks doing something Serena suspected was close to nothing, and then called her and asked if she wanted him to continue working. She said yes, under conditions they negotiated over 4 hours on a secure call, conditions that included a reporting structure that ran to her directly and a transparency protocol that both of them found uncomfortable and both agreed was correct. She thought about her grandfather throughout those weeks, not in the abstract, grief-softened way of memorial, but specifically, his face, his voice, the particular way he laughed before the punchline, the tobacco smell of the desk drawer. She let herself think about him that way deliberately, on purpose, because she had spent 5 years not permitting it, and the not permitting had cost her something she was now trying to get back. Elias Mercer did what she had not expected him to do. He came to see her. 12 days after the warehouse, he appeared at the address she kept in the city, the secondary apartment, not the marital home. And he knocked, and she answered, and they stood in the doorway looking at each other with the particular discomfort of two people who have known each other in one context and are meeting again in a completely different one. He had a cut healing above his eye. He stood very straight, the way people stand when they're trying to hold themselves together with posture because other methods are temporarily unavailable. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You don't," she said. "You were managed. You didn't know what you were part of." "I knew something was wrong," he said, "for longer than I admitted to myself. The introductions, the money, He stopped. "I wanted it to be legitimate because it was useful, and I knew it wasn't legitimate, and I didn't ask the questions that would have forced me to stop." He looked at her directly. "I participated in something I should have walked away from because I preferred not to know. That's mine." She looked at him. The man she had married had never, in 5 years, taken unqualified responsibility for anything, had always found the framing that distributed the weight, the context that explained the behavior, the narrative that positioned him as the reasonable actor in a situation that had simply become unreasonable. "Okay," she said. "That's all?" he said. "I forgave you before you got here," she said. "Not for you. Resentment is expensive, and I don't have the capacity for it right now." He nodded slowly. He looked past her into the apartment, at the bookshelves visible from the door, the stacked files, the evidence of a person in the process of reconstruction. "Who are you?" he said, not unkindly. The genuine question of a man encountering a truth he should have looked for years ago. "Someone who tried to be ordinary," she said. "Wasn't. Should have told you earlier." She looked at him. "You should go rebuild your life, Elias. You're capable of it. You just need to stop building it for the version of yourself you want people to see." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry about your grandfather." "Yes," she said. "Me too." She closed the door. 3 months later, she stood on the deck of the restored superyacht as it moved through open water at dawn, the light coming up low and gold over the horizon and the coast, receding behind them. And the organization was 3 months into the restructuring that was the hardest and most necessary thing she had ever built. The dismantling of its most damaging operations, the reorientation of its logistics and security infrastructure towards something that could exist in daylight, slowly, piece by piece, without destroying what her grandfather had spent 40 years assembling. It was not clean work. There was no version of this work that was clean, but she was done with the version of herself that stood at a restaurant table and signed papers while someone who had never understood her planned for her surrender. The water ahead of them was open. The horizon was empty in every direction, which was not, she had come to understand, a condition to be afraid of. It was what you got when there was nothing left in your way.